In this first part of the video, we will be looking at marginal thinking and the role of marginal choice. So what do we mean by marginal thinking in economics? So whenever you hear marginal, you think of one extra. One extra. It's like saying on a hot day, you decide to go for ice cream and you start with the first scoop and you decide to take one extra and then you take one more extra. So you always take one and then you evaluate. You don't just go and say, I'm going to take 5. No, you take the first one and then you decide, is the cost of taking one, the cost of one ice cream, is it less than the benefit? If the cost is less than the benefit, fantastic. You want to take the second scoop. If the cost less than the benefit, until you get to the point where the cost is at least equal to the benefit. If the cost is more than the benefit, it makes no sense for you to do that. That's not good for you. So marginal thinking is focusing on the additional or incremental choices. You don't put everything in one basket, you go one after the other, it's additional. So marginal choices involves the effects of adding or subtracting from the current situation. So think about it. It's like in a firm, you decide, let's say you run a restaurant and you sell sushi. Now you have 10 workers. You don't just hire 10 workers, you hire you have to make sure every time you add a worker to your team, you evaluate the cost and benefit of that extra worker. If that extra worker has a significantly higher benefit than the cost, then you want to go with that worker. However, if the cost is higher than the benefit, you don't want to continue doing that. So that's the main idea behind marginal thinking. You want to think at the margin. And that brings us into what we call the role of rational choice. So individuals will continue with an activity if they expected marginal benefit. So what they expect, it may not come out to be what they expected. However, if their expected marginal benefit is greater than the expected marginal cost, they will continue with that activity. Now, net benefit is simply the difference between your expected marginal benefit and your expected marginal cost. Now, remember, this is before things have happened. If you expect to benefit from something, that your benefit will be more than the cost of each extra unit, you go with it. So the difference between expected marginal benefit and expected marginal cost is just the net benefit. And for you to continue with something, you expect that to be positive. So the role of rational choice simply wants you to understand that you must always weigh the expected marginal benefit of, for example, cleaner environment against expected marginal cost of cleaning that environment. If the expected marginal benefit is greater, then you have to continue, you have to do it. If that's not the case, you have to stop. Now, this is an example, zero pollution. When you look at it, if you say you don't want any pollution, it's simply going to be too costly. What do we mean too costly? When we use the rule of rational choice, we simply realize that the expected marginal cost is higher than the expected marginal benefit. Why? Because it means we have to forego all forms of travel, we have to grow our own food, we don't have to get into certain places. But however, that's not what the environmental movement is actually demanding. This is just an example for us to understand the concept of marginal thinking. The fact that we always have to look at the cost and benefit. Now, we are going to take a look at the next concept, which is incentives. Incentives matter. So we can predict how people respond to changes based on the incentives which are there. Why do you do certain things? You do things because of incentives. You do or you stop doing certain things. Now think about it. If you drive a car and you are late, why will you not hit the gas pedal, especially if there's no one on the way. It's because you know what will happen to your bank account, to your money, if you do that. So we have what is known as positive and negative incentives. Positive incentives encourage you to do a certain activity. Negative discourages you. For example, if the government wants people to use electric cars, the government will put a subsidy to it to reduce your costs. In so doing, they encourage you. That is an incentive, and it's positive. A negative incentive is like the government taxing people who are using cars that use gas. In so doing, they discourage you. So that's what positive and negative incentives mean. Now, in acting rationally, people are responding to incentives. They react to changes in expected marginal benefit and expected marginal cost. So if you expect your marginal benefit to be higher than your marginal cost, you are going to continue doing that thing. That is an incentive. The expectation of higher marginal benefit compared to expected marginal cost is an incentive to continue doing that particular thing. So if the benefits of an activity like crime rise and or the cost falls, so if the benefits rise and or the cost falls, then economists expect the amount of that activity to rise. For example, now the amount of cars which are being stolen is just insane. Why? It's simply because the expected marginal benefit for that activity is much higher than the expected marginal cost. There's no significant jail sentence for someone who does that compared to someone who is playing around with hard drugs. So you expect that to rise. So the government has to somehow think of ways to play around with incentives. So positive incentives are there to either reduce cost or increase benefit. So positive, you apply positive incentives when you want to encourage an activity, and you apply negative incentives when you want to discourage an activity. Yeah, so a subsidy encourages and taxes discourages. So let's take a look at the next item, which is specialization and trade. We'll do that in the next video.